feel like it has to be, oh, that's quite all right. Can you hear me now? First of all, I have a story about the 5 love languages. When I was engaged, we went to a conference or premarital conference, and they did the 5 love languages, and I filled out my form, and Mark is my husband, and he filled his out, and I was even. It was across the board, all 5 were pretty much even. There might have been one that had one more number and one that had one less, but he's like, what am I supposed to do with that? And I'm like, I don't know, just do something. Just pick something. Obviously, And so he has learned. It is kind of pretty complex because it's not, I don't fall in just one category. Although quality time is probably the number one for me. So tonight we're going to talk about self-compassion. How many of you know about self-compassion or have maybe heard about it? Okay, good. I had this moment where I'm when I ask that question, everybody's going to raise their hand and be able to do the talk. So that's good. We're going to learn some stuff tonight. So self-compassion is actually something that started in more of the psychology field and the therapy field. I don't think I go more than 2 days at Rogers because I work at Rogers, and for sure not a week without talking about self-compassion and discussing it either in a one-to-one session or in group or something. Because it's something within the therapy field that we have found can be really, really helpful in people's treatment and in people's lives in general. And so if you look at compassion, compassion is basically a kindness with a deep awareness of the suffering of other living things, coupled with a hope to relieve it. Self-compassion is a kindness for ourselves with a deep awareness that we struggle at times and hoping or having a desire to relieve it. And so Jamie asked me a while back what I wanted to talk on, and right away I was like, self-compassion, because I just love self-compassion. And then I had this moment where I'm like, we don't really talk about self-compassion in the church. Is that even a biblical thing? So I got a little bit and she told me, she was like, it doesn't have to be biblical, but at the same time, I'm like, I kind of want to know, is this actually a biblical concept that, first of all, I'm talking about quite a bit, and also applying to my own life. So I'm like, it's nice for me to know if it really is biblical. And so it is. It's not, you're not going to be able to look in the Bible and say oh, self-compassion. But there are things that I have found that really says that the importance of self-compassion is there. And one of them is the verse from John 10:10. I've come so that they may have life and have it abundantly. And I really do believe that in order to have life abundantly, we do have to give ourselves compassion. We have to give compassion to others. We have to have that compassion for others, and we have to have that compassion for ourselves. And then in Matthew 22, 36-40, most of you have heard this. When the teacher of the law came to Jesus and asked him, what is the most important commandment? Jesus answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. And I don't know about you, but I kind of grew up with this verse being taught kind of don't be selfish. This idea of put other people first before yourself. Now that I'm a little bit older and I've read it a little bit more, I'm I don't even know where people really get that concept within that verse of somehow you have to put others first because otherwise you're being selfish. That's not what it says. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. So it's saying you need to love yourself almost in order to love your neighbor. And the next one is one of my favorites. It's from Psalm 139, 1 and 2. Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. And that to me is this idea that I'm fully known. I'm fully known and I'm fully loved. And if I'm fully known and I'm fully loved, there is a God that has compassion for me and wants me to have compassion for myself. And the last one, there's more, but I'm going to go over one more, and it's 1 John 3:1. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. And really, I believe that self-compassion has a lot to do with identity. Our identity in Christ is, I really do believe, part of self-compassion, that idea of knowing who we are. So, with that said, I have one of my favorite songs is by Lauren Daigle, You Say. So I'd like to have it played, and for you guys to just look at if you want, you can look at the lyrics, because it'll be up on screen, but don't feel like you have to. Just sit back, relax, and see what it says to you. Do you want the microphone moved, or does it not matter?
I keep fighting voices in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just the sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. Ooh, oh, you say I'm loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I'm strong when I think I'm weak. And you say I am held when I am falling short. And when I don't belong, oh, you say I am yours. And I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe the only thing that matters now is everything you think of me. In you I find my worth, in you I find my identity. Ooh, oh, you say I'm loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I'm strong when I think I'm weak. And you say I am held when I am falling short. When I don't belong, oh, you say I am yours. And I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. Oh, I believe. Taking all I have and now I'm laying it at your feet. You'll have every failure, God. You'll have every victory. Ooh, oh, you say I'm loved when I can't feel
first of all, I don't think she has it all together and then is like going to God. So like that's one of my favorite pieces of it, is that there's a rawness to it, and there's a like just an authenticity of like it's hard to sometimes believe in ourselves, and it's almost overwhelming in a lot of ways to kind of even know and understand that God feels this way about us. So this idea of like, I believe, like it's not, you can tell like how she's saying it is like she really wants to believe it, and she does believe it, but there's that moment that you just have to trust the fact that you believe it. And so that song is something that, honestly, when I listened to it earlier today, it brought tears to my eyes. So it's very moving for me. So I think she really pinpoints the importance of recognizing that we're not always going to have it all together, and that self-compassion is that piece of it's okay that we don't always have it all together. I was driving into work the other day, and there was like this moment that I was like thinking about all these things that I do in life, like categories, because as a therapist, you kind of like, that's how you kind of tell how, in a lot of ways, how somebody's life is going, because you're like, how's your family? How's your relationships? How's your social life? How's your job? How's your wellness? And I'm like, it's impossible to achieve excellence in every single one of those categories all the time. Like, it was like this revelation that came over me. And I'm like, well, duh, of course it is. Like, I don't even know how you could possibly do it even if you were like the most rigid, regimented individual, which doesn't sound at all living abundantly at all. And then it's this idea that there's no way, we're gonna fall short at times. And short on a lot of times the things, if I'm being honest with you, the things that I put on myself. It's not even necessarily the things that other people put on me, although that does come into play sometimes, and definitely not the things that God puts on me. It's what I'm lots of times disappointed in or upset about. So the opposite of self-compassion is actually self-criticism, and it's usually due to the shame cycle. We feel not good enough and then label ourselves with negative labels. We do a lot of shoulding. I should have done this, should have done that, I should do this. And we have this saying that we need to stop shoulding on ourselves. And it's true, like shoulding doesn't help us. We overgeneralize, so the minute that something does happen, we sometimes hyper-focus on that one thing and completely forget about the 100 things that we did great, And it's a cycle that is, because it's not necessarily like I did something wrong, it's that I'm bad. And so conventional wisdom really would say we can shame ourselves into better behavior. How many of us do that? Like, I need to do this, therefore I'm going to start this new behavior because I feel like I need to do something differently. That's typically how we handle stuff. We're going to beat ourselves up. The thing is that self-compassion really isn't about making excuses. It's not about like, oh, it's okay that I did that. It's, of course, life gets in the way and things happen, and I'm not always going to do things the way that I want to do them, because it's impossible, again, to do all things excellent all the time. And so it's not saying like, I'm gonna make an excuse, I'm gonna be lazy, I'm gonna do this. It's more that of understanding who we are and the fact that I'm not always gonna be strong. There's gonna be times that I'm weak, just like Lauren Daigle said. There's gonna be times that I'm just not truly gonna have it all together. It acknowledges the struggle that we just have in life. I mean, there's suffering that happens in life, and there's no way that we're gonna get out of this life without any suffering, and self-compassion takes that into account. So, what makes it difficult to be self-compassionate? Childhood experiences, a lot of times, not by anybody. Sometimes it is like, obviously people come from pretty traumatic childhood experiences, but sometimes it's really not, necessarily traumatic, but it's just this thought process that the family has of like, you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and don't complain. Self-compassion isn't about excuses. It's just acknowledging that stuff is difficult and rough at the time. And yet, that childhood experience can just get locked in our mind. And definitely, our parents come from their parents who, obviously handed that down. And there's some, is there some good with that idea of like, well, you're up by your bootstraps and, don't, sure, there's some good with that, but we need that other piece too of compassion. It's that lack of awareness. Like sometimes we just don't know. Like we didn't know that it was possible to be, self-compassionate for ourselves. We didn't realize that that's a thing. It's just something we do for others. And negative beliefs about self-compassion, like I just said, like this idea that you're weak if you have some kind of self-compassion or you're letting yourself off the hook. That's a big one. Like most people that I'm teaching self-compassion to, most of the time, I'm like, what's your problem with self-compassion? Like, what don't you like about it? And they're like, well, I'm going to let myself off the hook. And it's not, again, letting yourself off the hook. It's acknowledging the struggle. So sometimes this happens. So this is the typical cycle that we have. It's great graphics, right? Okay. So something happens. It's a threat. It doesn't always have to be a threat. It's just something happens that creates kind of like an emotional response in us. And then we have a behavior that goes along with it. Or an action. And depending we basically soothe and go into shame because it's really difficult to feel challenging emotions. It just is. It's not something that comes natural to us. And the reason that it doesn't come natural to us is because our brain is wired to recognize threat, and challenging emotions are threat. So we're going to push them away and we're going to avoid them. So that, and our brain is great at that. That's why I said the coping skills, they're just, it's like sometimes we just don't use positive coping skills. And so, right now, I would like for you to think about how you view self-compassion. Do you think of it as being like self-indulgent, lazy, self-absorbed, and that you're going to sin more if you're self-compassionate? It's not that you know the right answer, because you likely know that, hopefully, through this, that we recognize that. It's like, how do you really, actually, when you think about being self-compassionate and recognizing that God loves you regardless, and that loving yourself is a part of that? Because I and you, you and me, that's what I remind myself all the time. You know, that Jesus is like, the Father's in me, I'm in you, you are in me. And it's like, wow, that is the biggest relationship that, I mean, you can't get any closer than that at that point. And so if I'm being honest with all of you, there are times that it's really hard for me to be self-compassionate, because I do think it's letting myself off the hook. I do believe that it's a little self-indulgent. But that's really not the case. So, and the reason that it's not the case is because truly hurt people. And that's what it's about. So the more that we hurt ourselves, we're really going to end up hurting other people. So that brings us back to that idea of loving your neighbor as yourself. You know? That idea that if I'm hurt, it's so hard for me to not hurt somebody else. And then the cycle just kind of continues. When we live in shame, we are less likely to love others. This is what makes loving our neighbor as yourself so important. Because we are connected as a community, and what we do to each other definitely makes a difference. So what self-compassion actually does is it takes into account our experiences and nurtures us. It creates that connection. It's that idea that, like Lauren Daigle, like for me, I think I called her Lauren Daigle before. I might have. Yeah, she's not going to know. So, you know, it's that idea of, you know, what she was saying is that connection that she has matters and makes a difference, and we are connected with one another, and how I feel about myself and how God feels about me is what really, really matters. It balances our emotion. Why does it balance our emotion? Because it acknowledges our emotion. And that makes a huge difference. Like, so many people are like, why does it matter if you acknowledge your emotion? And it's like, if we do not acknowledge our emotion, that doesn't mean that we're not experiencing it. It just means that we're not validating ourselves. And when we don't feel validated, we very easily get hurt. And that means for ourselves. So it does make a difference if you sit there and you actually say to yourself, like, I'm really disappointed right now. Or I'm really sad. Doesn't mean that you have to have a reaction to it. It just means that you're going to acknowledge it. So it balances that out right away. It increases mental health and well-being. Studies show that people that have self-compassion are less stressed, and stress causes both emotional and physical pain. And it really does help us be real. Again, that idea of we can't be excellent all the time, and that apparent competence, and we all do it sometimes. It's catching ourselves, kind of going, all right, I'm just pretending here. But you also know, because you've experienced it, when you meet somebody that's in that apparent competence and everything's fine and you're not, like, it doesn't feel really genuine because they've got it all, it seems like they've got it all together, and it doesn't feel like you're really connecting with a real person. And that also helps me with self-compassion because I'm like, I want to genuinely connect with somebody, so like that's a value of mine. And in order to do that, I have to be honest with all of you and with people that I'm in relationship with that there's no way I have that all together. I also do believe that self-compassion makes a difference with motherhood. I think kids definitely feel that. A bunch of you, like right away when I said that childhood experience, were shaking your heads. And so it is that idea that I think it's if you're more self-compassionate, they're also, well, first of all, they're going to be able to receive like that. If you're self-compassionate, you're going to be able to be compassionate towards them more. But then they're also going to see that it's okay that you're not perfect all the time. And that's going to be a huge thing that you can offer them. Because they've done studies on self-esteem. For a while, they really pushed self-esteem, 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 self-esteem. And what they realized is that most people that do really well in things, like most kids that are doing really well in school, have, good grades, social group, all of those things, typically, not always, have a higher self-esteem. And the ones that don't have a lower self-esteem. And the fact of the matter is that because self-esteem, most of the time, very different than self-compassion, is based on what we do and the accolades we receive. Whereas self-compassion is that idea that in spite of what I do, I have worth and I matter. And there's no way that I can always be perfect. It's that acknowledgement of the struggle. So, how do you do it? So self-compassion takes awareness. It really does. A lot of it is awareness of like that idea that you're gonna commit to the fact that you're gonna catch yourself of like, holy cow, some of the things I say to myself, I would never, ever say to somebody. There's not a chance that I would. So it's seriously like the awareness of going, wow, that was, if I heard my kid say that to their sibling or to a friend, I'd be like, wow, you probably shouldn't have said it like that. And so it's catching ourselves and giving us that awareness of, all right, I'm noticing that I'm doing this. I'm noticing that I'm speaking to myself very negatively and critically. And also, like, when somebody's giving you feedback, not just paying attention to the stuff that are growth areas. You know how that goes? Like, somebody will be like, oh, this is one thing that you could do differently, but these are the 100 things that you did right. You're going to concentrate on the one thing that's a growth area. And so it's like being aware of the fact that, nope, I'm concentrating on that. And so it is, like it's easier said than done, but like where I'm not being like, so stop it. But it is that just building that awareness. Normalizing the struggle is part of the human experience. That's part of self-compassion and so important. Like normalizing it. I'm not going to have it all together, and if somebody looks like they have it all together, they're just looking like they have it all together. So it's this idea that there's a certain amount of suffering that everyone experiences in life, and it occurs regardless of some of the things that we do. And how we react to it is not always going to be perfectly either. And the normalization of, we all fall short of the glory of God. That doesn't mean we all fall short of the glory of God, we suck. It means we all fall short of the glory of God, and he loves us each and every one of us in spite of that. Kindness, a willingness to have kindness towards yourself, and that's really important because it's one thing, like we're building awareness, but it's like check yourself, like are you really willing to offer yourself that kindness? And if you're not willing to offer yourself that kindness, what's stopping you from offering that to yourself? And that takes a little bit of an inventory because it is probably built in, maybe it's something that mom said to you and she didn't mean, maybe it's something that was just unsaid expectations in your life, maybe it's whatever, for whatever reason, your whole entire life, you really didn't feel like you lived up to whatever standard, whether it is, home, school, whatever. And it's taking that inventory. Why is it that I don't want to be kind to myself? Why am I not willing? Because this does take a willingness. There's no way that you can get through self-compassion without being willing to try it. But it's exploring that. It's wanting to alleviate the pain. So it's that willingness to offer yourself kindness and that desire to alleviate the pain that comes along with negative thoughts. The idea that I actually want to stop the hurt cycle because I don't want to punish myself. Because that's the other reason that people really don't actively do self-compassion is, like I talked about it, like we can shame ourselves into better behavior. And it's this idea like I deserve punishment. I deserve to feel this way about myself. So it's wanting to alleviate that desire to feel like extra suffering and stopping that hurt cycle. And a ton of patience, It's like, so sometimes people are like, I want to be more self-compassionate, and then they beat themselves up for not being self-compassionate enough. And so like there's going to be times that we're going to also struggle with that too. And honestly, I will say in the beginning, I think it's even going to be harder because you're going to be, as we build awareness, we're going to recognize it even more. And so if we're picking, to be aware of it and choosing to be kind to ourselves, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, wow. And then you're almost going to feel bad about feeling bad about yourself. And that just puts it on. And the other thing along with patience is that idea, it sounds crazy, and I know if I was sitting there, I'd be like, whatever. But if you actually take that negative thought and change it around with something kind, whether it's something that, like, it's a person that is kind and compassionate, what would they say to me right now? Maybe it's Jesus that you're like, what would Jesus say to me right now? And if you have to write it down, write it down. Put it on a mirror, whatever, because it's that idea of you're really retraining your brain away from negative thoughts. And I believe prayer makes a huge difference when it comes to being self-compassionate. Bringing that to God is going to be, for me, probably the thing that helps me the most, and it's not a prayer of, because I always remind people of this, it's not a prayer of like, I'm going to pray right. I'm going to pray, I'm not sitting up here going, you should pray 5 times a day. That's not what I mean. I'm saying bring those struggles, bring those negative thoughts, bring those negative feelings to God and be raw about it. Because I bet he, at that moment, will be reminding you of some of those same things that he was reminding Lauren Daigle about it in UC. So, I do have an imagery for you, if you would like to relax and take a minute, because I do think imagery does help too, of that idea, those moments where we need something to kind of ground us. So if you sit back, If you feel comfortable, close your eyes, but get into a comfortable position. Take a deep breath. Breathe deeply. Breathe out slowly. Just relax. Breathe deeply and breathe out slowly. You are safely alone, walking the beach. The sun is in the sky. You hear splashing of the waves, listening to the birds, and watching them soar high. Smell the salty air and slowly walk along the sand and enjoy the solitude. As you walk, you notice a figure coming towards you. There is a peacefulness to this stranger. As he comes closer, you recognize he is Jesus. Hear Jesus say your name and tell you how glad he is to find you here and to spend time with you. Greet Jesus in your own way and begin walking the beach with him. Notice what you are feeling because Jesus wants to be with you. Hear Jesus invite you to share with him the challenges that you are facing. Tell him about anything that frustrates, pains, gladdens, or saddens you about your life. Feel Jesus give you his complete care and attention as you walk and share with him. Listen to everything that Jesus now says in response to what you have shared. Watch as Jesus bends down. He picks up a handful of sand. As he gently closes his fist, sand trickles down through his fingers. Then Jesus opens his hand. There in the palm lies a pearl. Jesus smiles at you. He's reflecting on how perfectly shaped the pearl is. Hear Jesus tell you that he is aware of what a pearl and treasure you are. Feel the warmth of Jesus' hand as he takes your hand and places the pearl upon your palm. Notice how you are feeling to be appreciated by Jesus. Jesus lovingly looks into your eyes and places both his hands on your head to bless you. Feel the strength and gentleness of his hands. Hear his prayer just for you. Tell Jesus anything that is on your heart that you wish to express for having spent this time with him. It is time for Jesus to leave now. Together, say your goodbyes in whatever way is comfortable for you. Watch a moment as Jesus moves further down the beach. Turn and walk the other direction, remembering your time with Jesus. Remembering that he is always with you. Remember his gratitude to you for your time together, his blessing upon you, and his compassion for you. Breathe deeply. Let your breath out slowly. And when you are ready, open your eyes. It's really finding those things that kind of ground us and help us. We have to actively and mindfully seek them out because the world is so chaotic and will take our mind in every direction. And again, those negative thoughts just creep in. And so it's taking those moments, whatever it takes, to remember who you are and having that piece of self-compassion that says, it's okay that I'm not perfect. I'm still loved. So, thank you, guys. I do have questions on the table for you, and I forgot to put this out too. It's a questionnaire for you two. It is like, lots of times we know the answers, but that doesn't mean that, like, we can know them, but that doesn't mean that we actually, like, that they're a part of who we are. So, like, this is asking you to check the things that apply. So, you know, one of the things is, like, I find it hard to be kind to myself. And it's like, I know that I should be kind to myself, but do I really, truly find it hard to be kind to myself? So it's this idea that I want you to check some of these boxes so that you recognize, and it's not like, oh, I only have 3. You know, it's like, okay, that's still hindering me and allowing me to know that I need to have some more self-compassion. So it's not like, oh my gosh, if you have 7, you're in big trouble compared to somebody that has 3. It has nothing to do with it. It's about, again, building awareness.